My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Sam Ekstrom-Welch, Rae-Ekstrom-Welch, and Kevin Geller. It's June 30th, 2025, and we're at Liner Elsen in Portland. And thank you to the three of you for joining us today. We really appreciate this. First question to get things started, and anyone can take it and roll with it. Why wine?
Okay. I can start. Okay, why wine for me began with university, and it began with a love of languages. So I went to Lewis and Clark College here in Portland and majored in French and German. I had been taking French for a long time. The German was a surprise due to some really lovely professors who I just really wanted to learn from. And when I graduated, after a brief stint in the customer service side of tech using those languages, I decided office life was not for me. And I was left a little bit with a loss of what local industry could I work in that might allow me to use this otherwise hard to use outside of a master's degree. So I landed on wine. I spent some time on a study abroad in Alsace, France. So Riesling was my first love, and I knew a little bit about that region, and I figured, well, hey, let's try. So I worked first for Teutonic Wine Company, also here in Portland. I chose them because in a 5-minute Google, I found that they specialized in Alsatian and German varieties, and I called Barnaby, and if you've met Barnaby, you know that he is delightfully open and casual, and he said, come down in an hour and have an interview, and I got a job, and I was washing barrels the next week. Which was really relieving after office life. Long story short, after that, ended up in importing. I still am a full-time importer-distributor, also for a company here in Portland called Julian Sinclair, and continued to fall deeper in love with wine through that experience, and then came to Liner through love, which we will get to in another question. All right, which of you's got it next?
All right, I'll go. So my intro to wine started with food, actually. Growing up in Wisconsin in the 80s as a punk rocker, my only real option for work was restaurants on the backside of things. No one wanted a Mohican server at the time. Now, not so bad, but and so was working in restaurants for a while and fell in love with food and cooking. Did that for several years around many restaurants in Madison, and eventually left that and took a job in a paint factory, actually, and after doing that for a couple of years, I started cooking a lot at home for myself, and kept I'd go through cookbooks and always pair with this wine, pair with that wine. And the only wine I'd ever had was gallon jugs of Gallo or terrible wine at weddings. And I hated wine. And I was like, I'm clearly missing something here. And so Olivia said, why don't you get a book and learn a little bit about it? And so she got me The Idiot's Guide to Wine, which I started reading, page 1. And when I got through 3 or 4 chapters, word for word, and they're like, all right, now you know enough to go to the store and make an educated decision, ask the right questions. So I went to the store down the street from my house and asked the right questions, and they gave me, actually I had my heart set on a bottle of wine, and they're like, you don't want that wine, you want this one, and they gave me another one, which is testament to great shops, I guess. Anyways, took it home, cracked it, 1 sip, and my head exploded. I was like, oh my God, where have you been all my life? And from that minute, I, like the next day, went to the library, got every book I could find on wine, and just started reading and reading and reading and reading. And this paint factory, I got paid every single Friday, and I would go to the bank and cash my check and drive to the other side of town to the best wine shop in town and buy a couple bottles and just pick their brains. And eventually Olivia said, why don't you see if they're hiring? Because she knew I wasn't that happy at the paint factory. And so I went, put in an application, and they said, oh, no, we're not hiring, but we'll keep your application. And every Friday I'd go in and I'd chat and so, by the way, you hiring yet? No, not yet. And months and months went by, and one day I went in and I said, so are you hiring? And they said, yes, we are. And your name is at the top of the list, and they set me up with an interview, and I got a job like the next day. And that was 1997, I think, so I've been at it a while here. And never looked back. So.
And that shop was in Madison?
In Madison.
How about you, Sam?
My story also starts in college, where I got a history degree from an engineering college. So naturally I ended up working retail. And this was over on the East Coast at the time, and I thought to myself, why not move to Portland, Oregon? Because in 2008, that's just what people were doing. So I ended up here without really a job or even a particular direction of what kind of job, but it was probably going to be some sort of retail. So I bounced around working for kitchen caboodle for a couple of years. And then I got a job working for Made in Oregon out at the airport in the gift shop. And one day they needed somebody to staff the wine kiosk after security. And in order to do that, you had to open it at 5 in the morning. And turns out that they could only find one person who was willing to do that, to catch the first train in the morning into the airport. And it's not a terribly hard job, because flights come and then you're more or less by yourself for 6 or 7 hours a day. And so I had a computer. My manager handed me a Jancis Robinson guide on wine and said, have fun. And I just started reading the book and talking about wine with people who, at least at the outset, knew more about wine than I did. But I just never stopped reading and never stopped researching, and I started getting my certifications, and then one day I went to look at job postings because I was pretty bored with my job, and it was a very anonymous looking post for a classic wine shop, and I looked at it and I applied to it, and I went home and I said, that could have been the corner drugstore, or it could have been Liner Elsen. And it turned out, in fact, to be Liner Elsen. So that's when I started working here, back in 2014. So
you all kind of mentioned sort of like, I guess, the deeper education of wine, which is something that's always fascinating to us. So tell us about and again, any of you can start with this. Tell me about learning wine and about, I guess, what it is that is so addicting about it. What you start reading a book, and then all of a sudden you're reading all the books. So tell me. Let's start with you, Sam. Tell me about like starting with one Jancis Robinson book and then going from there. What kept you wanting to learn more? What was exciting about wine?
It never ends. There's no bottom. You don't get to the end because the next year there's a new vintage. And even in the 10 years that I've been working here, 10, 12, in the period of time that I've been working here, things have changed. Like that Jancis Robinson book that I read is 20 years out of date, and it would need 6 more chapters to talk about wine from Eastern Europe, or even new style Brunello, and so many things that are just constantly changing, and it's there's just, for intellectual curiosity, pure intellectual curiosity, it just never stops coming, and it all wraps up in history, which that's the one way in which I do use my degree, is that there's all these parallel things happening with wine and history and people, and if you read about a winery in rural France or Spain or somewhere that's been there since the 10th century, and there's just a lot of background to get into, a lot of connections to make. And
What about for you, Ray?
I mean, I think the history is really strong for me as well. I grew up loving history with a dad who read entirely historical nonfiction and fiction. But for me, even more strongly, I think it's the connective element that wine has in the world. As long as there have been people, there have been fermented products. You know, it grew up alongside food, alongside one of the most essential parts of being a human being. And I was interested in travel from the first time I had the ability to travel, and connecting cultures, you know, meeting a farmer in Italy who makes wine and has made wine for 5 generations in their family. You know, I think there will always be an intense romance to that concept, and especially, you know, for a young American from the suburbs, I fell in love with that instantly. And then what kept me in it was that the people you meet are the kindest, most generous people, particularly the farmers. The smaller the farm, the harder they work, the kinder they are, the more they share. And working in wine has fostered so much connection, both personally for myself, but then just generally running into the same people when you travel, sharing something that brings a little bit of a culture that's thousands of miles away into your home. I think, you know, when people experience wine alongside the food of a region, they get transported, and that's impossible not to continue loving, and to continue learning about. You know, Sam mentioned also there's no bottom, and I wholly agree. The more I've learned about wine, the less I know. I learn new varieties every day, new regions every day, new styles every day. And I always used to tell friends when I first started working in this industry, and friends would be intimidated to tell me what wine they bought, right? Because it was $2 chuck. And I said, you know, wine is food. And nobody would ever tell you that you taste pizza incorrectly. And therefore you don't taste wine incorrectly. And it's all about engagement and the journey that you're on and enjoying it as food. And I think that if we all hold that to be true, then we can keep being in love with it forever. Follow that.
I can't. Both of you literally said everything that I possibly would have said. So. The never-ending thing is really the thing. I mean, you could learn every single minutia of every single winery, of every single wine region in the world, and then there's a new harvest. Everything is different. You know, the weather is different, the wines taste different. You start over again. So it's fascinating to me.
Had you had anything in your life that had struck you that way before, where you just had to know everything?
Food. I read cookbooks religiously, cover to cover. I'm obsessed with it. And the history of food. I like to do things, I like to go deep, like, you know, learning to make Thai food or whatever. I didn't want to just learn how to make a curry. I want to, you know, get the mortar and pestle and grind your own curry pastes and, you know, make my own coconut milk, which I don't do very often because it's really hard, but it's pretty satisfying. But yeah, just I I like to, when I'm really into something, I like to go as deep as possible. Gardening is another, I'm an avid gardener, and I constantly trying to learn, more and more and more.
So Kevin, we'll start with you again on this side. As you found wine, as you had your first mind-blowing wine and started diving down the rabbit hole, tell me about what wines, what regions, what anything attracted you. What did you find yourself being drawn to from on a wine level?
Oh boy, well, it's changed a lot. In the beginning, I've always liked Riesling. But other than that, like the wines I first started drinking were big, gobby fruit bombs. Lots of Shiraz, lots of Zinfandels, of which now I drink almost none of. But quickly, as time went on, I liked smaller, less big, juicy wines, much more structure, higher acid, for sure. Especially the wines like that, lower alcohol, higher acid wines work much better with food. And so, as far as pairing and things like that, I quickly kind of got out of the big, rich wines and found white wines and higher acid, lower alcohol red wines much more to my liking. I like a little bit of just about everything, but definitely lean more towards the elegant side of things.
What are you, Rae?
Well, as I said before, I was lucky enough to study in Alsace for around 6 months and got to have a great experience with the local wine there, because one of the most inexpensive options on a French restaurant list for drinking is wine, unlike here. And I was a poor college student, so it was whatever the house wine was what I was drinking. And so I fell in love first with white wines, and with Riesling in particular. In Alsace, the Riesling is dry, and so that first, but as well as that, off-dry whites. And it's funny to come from that direction. I think most people come first to the big jammy reds, like you did, just naturally because there's so much of that in the market. But yeah, I started on the other side, and I remain to this day an acid freak. Very often, the only disagreement the two of us will have on a wine that we bring home, because we're married, will be on a white wine where he feels there's plenty of acid and I don't. So I'm very much on the end of that spectrum. But I think as far as light bulb wines, I did have one in particular, which if you ever get your hands, dear watcher of this, on a bottle of Domaine Labé again. It's a small winery in the Jura, which is beloved by many a nerd. But it was a bottle of Sauvignon that I had toward the beginning of my career, and just kind of lit up. What could white wine be? What could it become? Where has it been? And I think, like Kevin, pairing has always been a big thing in my life too with the wines. I love wines that taste like food. I love wines that change with food. One of my favorite things to taste in a wine is there are certain ones that just hit you and you taste a whole meal. And that always is just like magic, so magical. So anytime there's one of those, take a few bottles home.
Yeah.
What about you?
I grew up, drinking small amounts of wine with my parents, and it was usually something Ravenswood, Kendall Jackson, very, very low, grocery store wine. And all of my various first experiences with wine were kind of disappointing. Like my first Nebbiolo I had, I was like, ooh, this is thin and bitey. And I went and had a glass of red wine on my 21st birthday, and I didn't get carded. And I'm like, why am I here? So it wasn't really until I had the job working out at the airport and having to talk to people about wine that I was even in a position to have a light bulb wine. And it ended up being a Oregon Pinot Noir. No surprise considering the job. It was Carlton Cellars 2006 Rhodes End Pinot Noir. And it was very bold, very earthy, and as I was drinking through it, I just went down the list like, oh yeah, there's this note and this note and this note and this note, and it occurred to me, drinking this wine, that it actually did have this incredible complexity to it that I hadn't really tuned into before. And so that was the switch that sort of flipped for me. And I would say since that time, my experience with wine has broadened a lot. I started taking classes, and for a minute, my favorite wine in the whole world was Bandol. And then 10 minutes later, it was Chenin Blanc. And now it's probably still Chenin Blanc. But when I had the 2010 vintage L'Abbaye that one time at dinner, it was that wine. That's up there. But I think the more experience that I have with more different kinds of wine, the less certain I am, that any one variety is the best. I think there are a lot of varieties that get sort of discarded as bulk grapes, when in fact what's going on is that this easy to work with, high yielding variety is happy to give you a giant crop if you want to. Chardonnay would do that. Chardonnay does do that in a lot of parts of the world, but if it's treated differently, if winemakers are trying to make great wine of it, mostly keeping the yield down, you get Montrachet. And you can do that with all sorts of grapes that people just skim right past. So,
yeah, I think all three of us are big lovers of underdog grapes, which is something we try in the course of the shop to help people learn about grapes they haven't heard about before, or that they may have passed by. I think all of us, in true nerd fashion, very much adhere to the idea that, if you haven't found a Muscat you like yet, you will. There's one out there for everyone, of every style, of every grape. Wine is always there to surprise you.
Pelaverga is my current obsession. Yeah, I want every Pelaverga I can find.
Say it 10 times fast.
I'm not even going to try.
We'll start with one. So Kevin, tell me about, you mentioned obviously getting to this wine shop that you were frequenting as a customer and hounding for a job, and then you get the job. So tell me how that sort of starts to change your relationship with wine, and tell me about starting to kind of build your palate and build your ability to identify and sell wines.
Yeah, well, just tasting really. When I first started, I didn't get to taste that often. It was the buyers did more of the tasting, but every once in a while they'd be like, "Oh, come try this one," and I'd try it, and I was like, "Oh my God, this is great." Also, having access to buying wine at wholesale made it a lot cheaper to explore. And they had, it was very archaic, but they had a computer list of all of the wines, and they had a massive basement, and things got lost, and I would just sit there and go through, and I was like, oh my God, I gotta find this one. I would go dig around in the basement and find it and buy it, and I got I got a bottle of Lafite Rothschild that I paid $90 for. That was pretty cool. But yeah, I just digging and diving. But tasting was really the biggest thing. There's no substitute for it, really. And tasting with people that know, they'll explain it, and when the reps would come in and go through a lineup of wines, and I would ask all the questions, and I learned so much. I still do. Every day I learn things, which is great. So, yeah. I think last week I tried 2 grapes or 3 grapes that I'd never heard of, which I didn't know was possible, but it just keeps happening. So.
Ray, you mentioned obviously your first step was with Teutonic, which is that's an amazing first place. Tell me about the experience of getting into wine that way.
Yeah, I mean, I learned so much so quickly at Teutonic because what I told them on the phone and, my qualifications, I said, hey, I've never worked in the industry before, but I'll do whatever you want. I can work in the tasting room, I can learn the cellar, whatever you need me to do. I just really want to try this. And, they were incredibly generous with their knowledge. Barnaby and Olga, the owners, as well as at the time, their assistant winemaker, Alex Neely, who now makes Libertine wines. They shared their knowledge incredibly graciously with me. It was, a fun jaunt of my first 2 weeks were washing barrels. And then I went out into the vineyard, and it was approaching harvest time when I started. I started at the end of July. And so we were preparing for harvest, and then I worked a harvest, and so I learned all about, how tiring punch downs are, and I learned how to set an alarm and then run through a winery as the CO2 was everywhere in the air and trying not to breathe before I got out before the alarm went off, which was really fun. And, that's why do you think I run so fast when the alarm goes off here? It's built in with all those fermenters. No, I mean, it was a great experience where I got to touch a lot of different parts of what it was to work for a winery, and worked in the tasting room and met their clientele. I helped them build a wine club and learned how much organization that requires, and it's a lot. And yeah, it was a great entry into wine, particularly into the local industry, which I was adamant about giving back to. I was like many folks, I'm a California transplant originally. I went to school here and I wanted to stay, and part of why I ended up in wine was because it was a local industry, and I really wanted to get work in a local industry and be a good transplant. It wasn't just profiting off of Oregon's beauty. So yeah, it was a really interesting and fulfilling experience, and I worked there for a couple years and ultimately left because of another opportunity coming up. But my favorite day, I'll say, just to kind of encapsulate the experience, my favorite day was going out into half of the vineyard sites to make what's called a pied de cuve. So we were essentially isolating natural yeasts so that they could be used to naturally inoculate the harvest. And I went out into the vineyard and I picked a bucket of grapes and I punched those grapes down and I covered them over with cellophane, and then I went to the next vineyard. And it was a beautiful day, and I was driving through the northern part of the valley and just kind of marveling at how magical and beautiful it was, with everything, fully ripe and ready to be picked, and how cool it was to be part of something like this. And that's really what that experience gave me. It gave me the appreciation and the love for our local industry that I still have.
This is after working at a job where she would get yelled at in 3 different languages.
Yes, customer service.
On any given day.
So Sam, you mentioned obviously first stop for you was at the airport. An interesting spot, as you said, for diving into Oregon wine. So tell me about starting to learn to sell wine. Obviously, you mentioned you had to learn to taste it. I wanted to talk about it. Tell me about the retail experience for you there, and about selling wine in that kind of atmosphere.
Yeah, I still love airports. And I say that's actually true, because people in airports are happier than by and large, unless something has gone extremely poorly. They're happier because they're either just coming home or they're just going on a trip. So everyone's a little nervous, a little happy, a little excited, and so it was a very easy place to have some very nice looking bottles of wine. Oh, you need a gift? So it was always lots of fun, kind of, to interact with people. I had regulars, weirdly. Some business travelers, would come through, and actually, one of the, like, my most regulars at the kiosk, he came into the shop here, and like, we kind of recognized each other after, 14 years or whatever, but the whole time I was like, where do I know this guy? Where do I know this guy? And finally, it's like, wine kiosk. I'm like, yes, Newark. And yeah, it's, I guess, there's nothing quite like working in an airport, at least having worked outside of an airport too, just because it's, kind of everybody's in it together in this very one specific spot, doing this one specific thing, and yeah, I'm glad I don't have to wake up at 5, or rather 3 in the morning anymore. So that's definitely nice. That was one of the first things that I liked about getting this job. Is when my alarm went off at like 7, and I wasn't halfway through done my workday. So.
Well, let's talk about this job. Obviously, you said you didn't know. You didn't know exactly what you were applying for. You knew, but you knew Liner Elsen existed. So tell me about kind of your impressions of the place and I guess initial impressions of the job.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know a huge amount about the shop before applying to work here, but I knew of it because it was, I should hope, remains one of the most important shops in the city. And I definitely did a lot of research very quickly after getting the job. And but I would say almost everything that I learned about working in this kind of shop, I learned after getting the job in the first 6 months, in the first year, essentially, of working here. There's nothing really in the industry that prepares you for it ahead of time, because I had been taking classes with the Wine and Spirits Education Trust, and they give you a curriculum, taste these wines, and then write down what you think about them, and that's fine, but you're tasting 15 wines in a week. On a given Tuesday, I've tasted 15 wines by 12:30. And just the sheer volume of tasting and spitting, because otherwise it gets very messy.
For the OLCC. For the OLCC.
Always spitting.
Very long day.
Yes.
You get so much more information just from being more or less constantly exposed to wine. And then, winemakers come in and they start talking about soil chemistry. And I'm like, I never took a chemistry class. I don't know what's going on here. Homeschooling. Yeah, I think once I had the job, I realized I had to sort of keep up, and that was hard, rewarding in the end.
So tell us
but
about
hard.
like the first year on the job. What were the biggest obstacles? The biggest surprises?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest obstacle was probably getting customers to trust me. Not everybody did immediately, and people who had been collecting wine since before I was born, why would they? So that was definitely a big part of it, was kind of getting into enough of a conversation and holding my own, talking about vintages or producers or what's actually good about wine, until eventually they're like, oh, okay. When this child makes a recommendation about wine, it might be good. I might actually be able to trust it. So
Ray, you talked about your next step being into importing distribution with Julian Sinclair. So tell me about how that opportunity came about, and about what appealed to you about that move.
Yeah, I think my my first interest in importing really stemmed from the language connection, because I really desperately wanted to use this otherwise somewhat useless degree, sorry Lewis and Clark, that my wonderful parents, shouts out Patrice and David, got for me. And you know, I had had options of a more practical degree, and I did not take them. I wanted the languages. So that was the first thought, because I went, well, you know, at the very, very, very least, it could help me pronounce things correctly. And at the very most, I could get an importer's job, and I could go talk to people in their languages and use this. And that was really appealing to me. And so once I'd worked at the winery and learned a little bit about wine, learned about production, I felt I didn't want to be in production, at least not at that point in my life. And so I got incredibly lucky that some of the kind winemakers I had met through working at Teutonic referred me to their, at the time, very small distributor. This was just a year after, 2 year, sorry, math.
15.
Math is mathing, no. It was 3 years after Julian Sinclair was founded by my bosses, Aaron and Kate Schwartz, and it was still really small at the time. And so I got connected just through word of mouth from having met people. This industry is, everybody kind of knows each other, which is a lot of fun most of the time. So the people who recommended me for the job, maybe you've interviewed them, was the wonderful Jim and Jenny of Fossil and Fawn, who we still represent and who remain wonderful people, close friends, and neighbors of Liner Elsen. And yeah, along with my colleague at the time, still colleague, Ross Maloof, who owns Maloof Wines, we opened the Portland market for Julian Sinclair and did a lot of hustling. Did a lot of self-deliveries in those early days. And one of those self-deliveries on the day before Thanksgiving for a small order of, I think, some champagne.
4 bottles of Renaudin.
4 bottles of Renaudin. Was to hear Liner and Elsen. And I'd been working with Sam and Kevin and the previous owner, Bob Sherb, as a rep at that point for a little while. And I was recently single. It's pertinent. And Sam here was also recently single, and he asked me out on a date over a delivery the day before Thanksgiving in 2019, and that's how I ended up entangled with these fine folks.
Strictly speaking, I probably shouldn't have. It's just
You'd kept it on the down low for a while.
We did. Yeah, we did. But yeah, I love importing. I'm still an importer distributor, and I love doing that as well. But Liner and Elsen was my first introduction to the retail side of things, and I've learned so much since being a part of this team, and really grateful for all of that knowledge as well. There's no substitute, as they both have said in other answers, there's no substitute for the amount of tasting you do at this shop. It's such an incredible environment to learn about wine. Because you just taste and taste and taste, and it's from the big distributors, it's from the small distributors, it's from the independent wineries. So you really, yeah, the amount you learn here is more than, with no offense to the WSET, which I also took part in. You learn so much on the job. I think that's such an essential part of being in the wine industry, whether you're at a winery, whether you're a distributor, whether you're at a shop, is that you learn so much about wine on the go. You know, the industry is just full of people who just kind of learn as they go, and that makes it really fun.
For sure. So let's talk about before we get to the retail side, I mean, you're talking about the importing distribution side. Have you gotten to use your language skills?
I do. I use them every week. I have a number of French producers that I only speak to in French out of their preference. So all of them can speak English, but some like to and some don't, and that's just fine. I haven't got to use my German as much, but there's always a ways down the road for that. And I started taking Spanish lessons 6 months ago, now that we import from Spain, with the hopes of being able to speak with them in their own language someday as well. That's the goal. But yeah, I travel in Europe for Julian Sinclair a couple times a year, if we're lucky, and go look for new folks and taste a lot of wines. And yeah, I feel incredibly lucky to be able to do that. It's, yeah.
Tell me about the hunt for new wines. How do you find who you're going to try, where you're going to visit?
I think in the same way as at every level of the industry, whether you are a winemaker looking to make new wine or at the retail level looking to sell something new, it's a combination. So you have things that come across your plate, totally by luck. Someone who, sends an email, or you try a wine at a restaurant, you really love it, and so you decide, I'm going to look up, see if they're here in the market, see if they're, And then there's the hustling way, which is going to wine fairs and tasting between 80 and 400 wines in a day over many hours. And I have done my fair share of that, both at very large fairs and also at smaller ones. And then occasionally someone comes to you, and isn't that beautiful when that happens? Occasionally you get really lucky and someone writes you an email and says, hey there, I make some wine, it's pretty good, and then you're off to the races. But the hardest is, the most challenging is the fairs, but it's also where you learn the most.
Imagine a Costco full only of booths of people pouring wine for you.
And then 10 more Costco's.
And then other Costco's next to it. It's all
In the
same.
case of Vinitaly, Costco's on Costco's on Costco's full of Italian wine. Yeah, it's pretty mind-boggling to see in person, and even more so to try to then narrow down, okay, what am I looking for? You have to be quite regimented. Otherwise, it's easy to get lost.
Kevin, when last we left you were still in Madison. So
Yeah.
tell us about how you ended up out here.
Eventually, Olivia and I decided it's time to get out of Madison. We've been there all our lives. An opportunity presented itself, in theory, for me to move out here. And so we started planning and saving, and we got, we used to get the Sunday Oregonian delivered to our house in Madison, and got our cell phones from a Verizon in Portland, and they shipped, so we had Oregon numbers and everything. We were ready.
And right in.
Great.
And then came out here, and to start, well, that's a whole really long story. But the idea was to start a business with a friend of mine, and we came, and he didn't. And so I found immediately knew it was not going to work out. So I was like, well, I guess I have to find a job. We had a house, fortunately. One of my customers in Madison, I mentioned that we were moving here, and he said, oh my God, I have a house. And I am looking to get rid of my tenants.
That thing that used to happen.
And if you want to rent it, it's yours. And I was like, do you take dogs? And he's like, I love dogs. We're in. So before we even moved here, I had a house,
That's amazing.
an Oregon cell phone. But yeah, got here and set up the house took a couple weeks. Olivia, she's a photographer, and had some contracts that she had to fulfill, so she stayed in Madison for about a month. I came up before her.
What year was this?
2003. And decided maybe I was going to look at the wholesale side of things, and so I made my resume and decided I was going to try all the distributors, and was cruised around to all of the distributors, dropping off my resume. Nobody was hiring at the time. And I was actually on my way from Galaxy going down 21st and saw the A-board for Liner and Elsen. And because of getting the Oregonian, I used to read, like Matt Kramer had a review column, and it would, at the end of the reviews, it would say where to get the wines. And so I was like, I know this store. And so I pulled over, and I happened to have a resume with me because I'd just come from Galaxy, and went in and introduced myself and was looking around, and Eric Pottmeyer came up and said, "Are you, can I help you?" And I was like, "Well, just looking around, but are you hiring?" And he said, "You know, in the weirdest of weird twist of fate, we actually are." And they had a guy, a part-time employee there, who, like the week before, went to Zap, the Zin Festival in California, and never came back. and there, or maybe it was like 2 weeks, maybe. And he stayed. I guess he stayed down there or whatever. But so they needed someone, and my timing was perfect. And I went for a couple of interviews. First, I interviewed with Eric and Mike DeMart, and then I passed their muster, I guess, and so then was supposed to have an interview with Bob, but the day of the interview, Eric called me and told me not to come because Bob had to go to the hospital, which was sad. So I had to wait and wait and wait, but eventually got my interview, 2 interviews with Bob. But after about 3.5 weeks of waiting, got the job. And this was in August of 2003. And yeah, so here I am.
And here you are.
Yeah.
Fun fact, one of the people who interviewed Kevin is the husband of my French teacher from university, because Portland is small.
Yeah.
And the wine world is incredibly
Yeah,
small.
as we said
super
before,
duper small.
everyone knows each other in the wine world.
So describe Liner Elsen for me when you got here.
Well, this was at the old store on 21st, which was smaller, not too dissimilar to this store, except for the front, obviously, but really tightly packed. But it was different, I think, because we still had the newsletter, which we put out every month, and that carried a lot of weight because there wasn't the internet really. I mean, there was, but not to the same degree as it is now. I mean, anyone can learn about any wine at any time, but then people really read the newsletter, and our Saturday tastings were a sea of people. There was fewer shops, but it was just, and people's buying habits were different. I spent most of my day like carrying cases out.
How many people did Liner used to send the paper newsletter out to in the heyday?
Thousands and thousands, yeah.
In the mail.
In the mail, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's cool to think about
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
Now it's a really nice email, but, you know,
Much more practical.
much more practical.
And much more economical.
Yeah, a little less romantic.
Yeah,
But that's okay.
yeah.
Such is the way.
But yeah, it was fun. And I learned so much so fast. But I mean, that's still the same. We still, every week, you know, the reps come and we taste with everybody, and yeah, it's my favorite part of the week. So my favorite part of the job, I guess. But.
Describe the clientele for me at that point. Who was shopping here, and describe the selection. How was it? How was the selection decided? What was being represented here?
Well, I mean, the same general categories, with the exception of, I think, Eastern Europe was maybe 3 bottles down in the corner there. But we sold a lot of Austrian wine, a lot of German wine, a lot of Burgundy, and Bordeaux, some California, more Washington wines than we do now. Obviously Oregon wines. And, you know, yeah, some of everything. The biggest difference is, I think, with the really fancy allocated wines, like I guess the wines are more scarce universally, but also
even here in town, there's a much bigger pool to spread them out. Like, we used to be able to get cases of DRC and had people to sell them to. Now we get bottles, and mostly they're sold to people, in other cities and states. So that's changed for sure. But it was still. I mean, a lot of the customers then are still our customers, which is great. I've known a huge chunk of our customer base for, 25 years. Well, not that long. 23 years, 22 years. But yeah, they still come, and I've seen their kids grow up and stuff, which is pretty cool.
You talked about learning a lot quickly, I assume.
Sure.
So let's talk about your kind of first year on the job. What were the biggest surprises?
The biggest thing for me was really learning Oregon wine. The shop that I worked in, Madison, we had our Oregon section was like 5 bottles or 6 bottles, and it was the stuff you can get at grocery stores anywhere in the country. So that was, I didn't really think I liked it that much, and then I came and every week I would meet winemakers. They would come in with their wines, and this was when everyone was putting out their 2001s, which is a spectacular vintage. It is my favorite vintage, my favorite Oregon vintage, and probably always will be. Just I think because it has it was very important in my education, and the wines were great. And
They still are.
They still are. It's true. They still hold up. I remember we did a blind tasting of 01s. This was probably in 04. And almost everyone that came was winemakers whose wines were in the blind tasting. And that was fun to see a couple people bash their own wines, which is a little bit embarrassing. But that was cool just to see them debating things and talking about the real interesting sort of minutia of it all. And that was my first big blind tasting too, which was really cool. And it wasn't that hard because it was all Oregon Pinot from 2001. So I wasn't really like trying to learn, figure things out. And I didn't know enough to like guess the different wineries, but it was very informative because when you don't know, I think you taste things differently. So you dig a lot deeper into all the little nooks and crannies of your brain to try and figure stuff out. So that was really cool.
Tell me your impressions of the Oregon industry at that time, of the people you met and the wines you were tasting as you were learning it. What were your impressions? What did you think of the industry?
It was cool. It was smaller. I mean, way fewer wineries, and so many people represented themselves. So I got to meet a lot of winemakers really fast, which was fascinating. I never dreamed that would happen. But I still now I go to like the Deep Roots thing, and I spend half my time just saying hi to people that I haven't seen in years, which is great. Because now a lot of them have distribution, and so they don't come around as much. But back in the day, everybody came, and on a pretty regular basis. So I got to meet a lot of the old guard winemakers like that, and that was great. And we used to go to some wineries and do like Cuvée L&Es and things like that, and so you got to do barrel tasting and things like that, which I loved and still love. Seeing that's kind of my introduction to the production side, was doing those tastings, and I still love it though. I love the Oregon wine industry. It's great group of people, great wines. Yes, I mean some really long-lasting friendships. John from Cameron and I, we have beers at halftime at every Timbers game that we go to. So
Just a lot of Timbers games.
But it's just a lot of Timbers games. Less so this year, but yeah. So yeah, still good friends with a lot of these guys.
And for Sam and Rae, I'm curious about your sort of, I guess, introduction to the Oregon wine industry as you were coming in at the time you came in. Tell me about getting to know the people, getting to know the wines, getting to know the places. What what were your impressions, and I guess sort of what intrigued you about the place and about the wines?
Want to go first?
Sure. Well, I mean, my introduction to Oregon wine was essentially representing only Oregon wine to tourists going back home, and I always thought it was funny when they would come and they would go straight to just a couple of wines. They're like, oh, I know this one because I've had it in Florida. And so I'm going to buy this bottle to prove that I've been to Oregon. And I'm standing there next to like 10, mom and pop operations, tiny little wineries that you can't find, even in Washington. And I'm like, why not get one of these objectively better wines, maybe? And so that was always kind of interesting. So pretty early on, I took on this notion that like I really had to strongly advocate on behalf of the Oregon wine industry, and that was kind of my initial impression of it, and I started to meet some people through connections in that job, and go out into the valley and go tasting whenever I could, and so I really wanted to be a part of the Oregon wine industry. So I think that definitely helped in the early days.
Yeah, I think my history with the Oregon wine industry is a little more recent than either of theirs as to when I started, but I think I started in a really fun corner of it, which was the Portland urban winery scene. And within that, you had all these really small outfits working with a lot of atypical varieties for the valley. Even though Teutonic makes Pinot and a number of them make Pinot, that wasn't really what I understood the industry to be immediately. And I think that's really stuck with me in what interests me most about the Oregon wine industry. I think it's scrappy. People are willing to experiment. We're still such a young industry that people are still kind of really discovering what it could be. We have the grapes we know grow well, but people are constantly experimenting. And at that time, I don't think I didn't appreciate how interesting that was kind of within the scope of domestic wines in the US. Even though I grew up in California, I moved here at 18, so I was never really around the industry there. And I learned about it from the perspective of Oregon, which is that, California industry is entrenched and expensive and fancy, and, they all kind of taste the same. And, I still haven't been there, so I cannot confirm or
California
deny.
wine is great.
Cannot confirm or deny because I haven't experienced that industry. But I think my impression of the industry here was very much tied into my impression of Oregon in general and Portland and the people here, which is, there is a very pronounced spirit of do-it-yourself here, of learning, of figuring it out, of experimentation. In the food scene, that's true. In the way that I think Portland as a city operates, that's true. I think in the activities people are interested in culturally here, the love of the outdoors, adventure, getting out there. And I think all of that goes into the wine. You have a lot of people making Oregon wine who are very small and very dedicated and just out there trying, out there experimenting. And that's what I found fascinating right away. Teutonic used to host they probably still do, but when I was there, we hosted guest winemaker spots on the weekend, so I got to meet a lot of other folks, but it was usually other small wineries, so it was a lot of people who, made 1,000 cases, 2,000 cases. And that was really cool to see, and it's still really cool to see those people having grown now. And yeah, I think even though we have made a name for ourselves as a region now within the US and to some extent within the greater wine world, I think there's still so much to discover in the Willamette Valley and Oregon's other regions. And I think that the people here are uniquely motivated to do that.
I mean, there are giant billboards all over the city that say, "Keep Portland weird." And that actually is true about the wine industry as well. David Lett's professors told him not to plant Pinot Noir because it was too cold. And he did it anyway. And people are always sort of pushing the boundaries, both in the vineyards, in the Willamette Valley, in the Columbia Gorge, down south, going ever higher up on the slope and so on. And also the importers here. Oregon is a really fun little spot in the country because everybody's in every state in the country, like wine is governed a little bit differently, and so the selection is a little bit different everywhere. And we get people, industry professionals come here from all over the country when they're doing the little market visits. We get winemakers from Europe. Even if they live in cities, they'll come into this shop and they'll walk around they'll walk the shop and they'll say, "This is amazing. How do you have this wine?" Because there are both the professionals like Rae and many people who came before Rae doing the distribution, and there is a customer base. The customers of Portland are just interested in pushing the boundaries and getting into all sorts of interesting varieties and, planting Gamay and Albarino and Sangiovese in the Willamette Valley. And when I take them over to the Eastern Europe part of the shop where there's Hungarian wine and Czech wine and Georgian wine, Slovakia, and all of these places that are opening up now, and people don't walk immediately away from me. And there's just a curiosity in this town that makes it a lot of fun to try and introduce new things to people.
Whenever I'm traveling for my day job, and people ask me, what's the Oregon market like? What's it like to sell wine there? What's it like, to drink wine there? The word curious, which Sam was using, is the first thing I tell everyone, that, people here, because there's a high education level from having our own industry, from having that kind of backyard wine region, people are willing to learn, interested to learn, and curious, and I think that makes selling wine both at a wholesale level and then even more so, I would say, at a retail level, such a pleasure, because we don't only find people the classics they love to drink. More than that, we help them learn about the wines that they will fall in love with for the first time. Yeah. And we get to kind of hand off this experience that we get to have. A distributor shows us some crazy wine, we all freak out, and then we get to share that with the customer, and they don't run away. It's that's the best part, I think, of where the Oregon wine industry, how it's developed, how it has come to be what it is today, is that relentless willingness to experiment and be curious and continue learning, and to do so with passion all the way through.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk a little bit about the history of Liner Elsen, and then let's talk about how you, through the 3 plus 4 of you, came to own the place.
It was founded in 1990 by Matt Elsen and Bob Liner, and they owned it until 1998 when they sold to Bob Sherb, who had moved here from New York. And then they went on to found Galaxy, and have now since retired from that. There was a litany of people that worked before me, some of whom went on, kind of famous wine people. And then I came along, and I was a a part-timer for the first about 1 year. And then Mike decided he was going to leave and go work for Zancanella, an old school distributor here. And I went full-time, and they brought in, for the first time, a third full-time employee, Neil Thompson. And the three of us worked together, just the three of us, for about 10 years, I think, including the move from 21st to this new location, which was in March of 2007. We had outgrown the spot. The rent was going up. I think the lease was up, and the landlord wanted an unreasonable amount of money for that space. It was very small, very dated, sort of haggard. And Bob and his wife Renee decided time to move. They shopped around, found this spot. The one thing that they were adamant about was having a parking lot. So they were a little bit limited in where they could shop. But at the time, this neighborhood was very different. It was about the average was a 1-story high, maybe a couple of 2-story buildings. None of the high rises that are here now, they were all warehouses or parking lots or weird little beat up little businesses and stuff. Yeah, George Moreland was across the street. And that New Seasons was just a big warehouse. And I don't even know what they did, but it was just the whole block was a warehouse. It had a parking lot, and across the parking lot where there's that apartment building was a little park. It was really cute. And we had great visibility because you could see the front of our shop from all, like 180 degrees all the way around. Then about a year in, the housing market tanked, and they tore down the park and built an apartment building, and now our visibility is not quite as great as it was, which is why we painted the windows.
Yeah, beautiful new window painting to compensate.
But so eventually Eric left, and it was Neil and I, and then they hired a guy named Matt, who had a kind of a computer background, and we had decided we were going to kind of get more into the online sales and have a proper website with an inventory and stuff like that. And so they brought in Matt, who was sort of he was a programmer, I guess, still is, I think. But he sort of built the first website and the point of sales and stuff, and got us up and running in that regard. And then he went off to San Francisco to make apps, which I think he still does. And then came a guy named Andy, who was not here very long. And then you.
This guy.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
October of 2014.
There you go. So we've had a couple other employees since then, but it's been Sam and I pretty much exclusively since then. So
how did you come to own it?
Bob retired.
So in
That was the
2022,
2022. Yeah.
Sam and I had just gotten married. Kevin was one of the best men. And we got back from our honeymoon, and we got about 20 days as a married couple before Bob privately announced to the three of us plus Kevin's wife Olivia that he was retiring and that he wanted to see if the employees might like to take over. And so began a period of intense learning, as acquiring a business involves learning more than you could ever possibly imagine. Mostly numbers, mostly forms, mostly compliance.
Very good.
So we all got to know each other really well, at least Olivia and I, and these guys already knew each other very well, and put our heads together and made it work.
Yeah.
And we signed the papers on New Year's Eve from 2022 into 2023. And our first official day as the owners was January 1st of 2023.
Did you have any hesitation?
You know, it's funny. I think we recognized pretty much immediately that there was an important legacy to be had here, and we all had a strong interest to preserve and develop it. So I don't remember many conversations between us where it was, you know, a should we so much as a how we.
Yeah.
I don't remember ever questioning it.
Yeah,
I mean, the logistics were challenging at times.
Lots of trepidation, not much hesitation.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
But I think in anything like that, you know, becoming business owners, a certain amount of naivete can be a really good thing.
For sure.
Because I think once you know the challenges of owning a small business, you know, there are some people who are uniquely cut out for it, but once you know the challenges, I don't know if everyone started knowing, I don't know that many people would try as hard as they do.
Very good point.
You know,
Yeah.
there's a certain amount of going in starry-eyed that I think helps people get things like that done.
And it was helpful for us specifically, having Sam and I have been here for so long. It was really just sort of formalities. It wasn't like us trying to start from scratch.
Yeah.
You know, the name didn't change, which, you know, was part of that. We would never have changed the name as part of the legacy of the whole shop. I mean, that's part of what we wanted to buy. And we didn't really change things so much. We updated things a little bit and added some things that we had always wanted to do. We put in like the food section and tried to make the front a little bit more comfortable, kind of encourage hanging out instead of discouraging it. Like seems like we sort of used to.
I think
We
the
did burn the
wine
carpet.
industry changed a lot over the course of Liner Elsen existing as a business, and one thing we all really wanted to encourage was for people to feel like they could spend time here and have the experience of being here rather than just taking wine home, because it's become so much more of an experiential thing. So we added Liner Elsen's first ever permanent seating, and gave the place a whitewash and some new counters and a backsplash that none of us planned on but all fell in love with instantly. And
We burned the carpet.
we didn't burn the carpet, but
Sorry.
we did
Yes.
get
No.
rid of it.
We discarded the carpet. Yes. Right.
But if you would like to see a piece of Liner and Elsen history when you leave the interview today, you can note the front mat is the original Liner and Elsen carpet.
Yeah. We have one small piece of it left.
So before you mentioned January 1st, 2023, kind of first official day. So tell me about the lead up process for you in terms of, you mentioned sort of trepidation, not doubt, but what were the biggest things you had to learn, had to deal with, had to kind of confront? And how did you feel by the time the shop opened at the beginning of 2023?
Well, we had to learn a lot about how banks work.
Yeah.
And you know that there's a lot more that we're still trying to figure out. But
We learned that having a really kick-ass lawyer is a really good thing.
Shouts out to Judy Parker, the winemaker's lawyer.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're allowed to give her a shout out, so cut that if not.
Please. Judy's been shouted out many times.
Okay. We love Judy Parker. She was another wonderful not relic, that makes her sound like a relic. She was a wonderful connection that I made through Teutonic. She taught me how to do compliance, and when we reached out to her about taking over, she was so excited. I think the legacy of the shop speaks for itself, and that was a big reason why we were able to get through all this nitty-gritty and working through all the more difficult details of acquiring any business. You know, I think there is a lot of there are a lot of elements that make a business worthwhile in the eyes of the customers and the people who love it over many years, and then none of those things generally matter to a bank. So then you have to learn, how do you translate that into a completely different sector that doesn't have the romance of wine, you know? They don't care how much Sam loves Valtellina.
Just numbers.
And so we learned a lot about how to make those translations and what to value for the banks and what to value for ourselves.
Yeah.
It was quite a time.
So talking about opening, the opening day, opening week, opening month, what were the excitements and what were the surprises?
Well, it was January, so I mean, it was cold, so you know. But I think pretty early on into opening, I at least had the realization, going in, that I was going in for myself. I signed my own paycheck and
Technically, Kevin signs our paycheck.
Yeah, well, technically, yes, but
Just to make it legal.
yeah, well, right, yeah. But writing the vacation policy and then sticking to it, sort of. But yeah, I think that the extra sense of reward, both, the worry and the reward sort of came at the same moment, where I could think, hey, I am doing this for myself and no one else. And then at exactly the same moment, you think, if I don't do this, no one else will. So those are related realizations that
I remember
that hit immediately.
being able to go home and not think about work, and that doesn't happen anymore. You're never really off anymore. So.
Yeah, that's true.
Yep.
I think another important note about when we took over, and continues to be important in the way we think about the business now, is how much the industry has changed. Not just the Oregon wine industry, but generally how people are drinking wine, what they're looking for, has changed so much over the course of the business, but I think in an accelerated way since we took over.
Yeah.
And so a lot of our experience so far has been a balance act between, we have many wonderful legacy customers who have always shopped here, and we want to continue to have what they want and provide for them. And then we also have this entire neighborhood that literally grew up around this location, that appeared out of nowhere.
About
and is
5 years
now,
ago.
Buildings full of families that we also want to be a part of. So we have really been striving over the first couple years of business to try to invite in the local neighborhood and be more a part of it than ever before, because it wasn't here in the same way during the history of the shop. Right. And, in the absence of as many people collecting wine, we, like many, many other wine businesses, have to pivot to being more neighborhood focused and more events focused, giving people the experiences they're looking for, as we were talking about before, everyone being more experience focused now.
Definitely.
So that's been an important realization, I think, that, we bought Liner Elsen, but Liner Elsen, like everything else, has to grow and adapt.
Yeah. All of you now have experience selling wine, various time experience selling wine. How is it different when you own the place? How is selling wine different now the last couple of years?
I think we do have the luxury. Sam was talking about our Eastern European section, which when Kevin started at the old shop was a few bottles, and now we have a much larger section. So one of the positive parts about being the owner selling the wine is we get to make the choices, and we get to take things that we're really passionate about and very graciously thrust them on customers with kindness, and say, you should really try this, trust us on this. And I think there is a certain amount of trust that comes with being an owner.
For sure.
You know, that a certain amount of credibility that helps people to trust us to guide them along their wine journey. And that can be challenging, especially with, we have, as I said, a lot of customers who have been coming here for their whole lives who, you know, why would they trust me, you know, in my 30s? And being an owner helps with that. It, you know, it means been here, putting in the time and caring about the wines and caring for the space, and that means a lot to people.
Yeah.
We're lucky to have Kevin's legacy, I think. When we were first buying the business, we talked a lot about that the four of us have different things to offer the group, and that we all kind of brought a unique skill to the table, and that was one of the things that helped us to feel confident that we could, in fact, pull this thing off. And I think, you know, a combination of, like, Kevin knows almost every customer by name when they come in. He knows their buying habits. He knows what they like and don't like. It's pretty amazing to watch. And, like, that presence and that history is a massive thing when you're preserving the legacy of a shop that is, you know, perhaps not by global standards that old, but by Portland standards, certainly so. And Sam does all of our writing and preserving, you know, the newsletter. Even though we may not mail it out to thousands anymore, we certainly email it out to thousands. Oh, yeah. And having someone who is so passionate about wine and then also knows how to translate that into writing is so important for being able to maintain that sense of passion and get that across to customers. Olivia, as Kevin said, is a photographer, and so we get all professional bottle shots, you know, and she has a really keen eye for design and is able to see things a little bit differently than the three of us do, and help us to create a space and content that is beautiful and modern. And I organize things decently, so we are a really great group together.
Yeah, it's true. It's
it makes a big difference.
It's been great.
Obviously, this is a unique time right now to be selling any kind of alcohol or wine. I'm curious about sort of meeting the moment right now. You mentioned obviously having to adapt to different types of customers and different types of needs. Tell me about how you're sort of handling right now, how you're trying to sort of change customer base, and look ahead for me for a few years. How do you want to see Liner Elsen evolve in the next few years?
I think one thing, definitely, it's like Ray said, much more experience-based. More, I think people really want tastings and interesting tastings, not just, you know, oh, here's 6 Burgundies, whatever. They want to be challenged. So we're gonna start doing some blind tastings, which is cool. We've started doing some classes. Wrapping up our sherry, a set of sherry classes, which has been really fun and very well received.
Yeah, it's been really fun.
So I guess trying to figure out where to go next with those. Some other events, we had like a paella party, which was really fun.
Bringing people in and combining wine, not just wine, but here's wine in the region in the case of sherry, or here's wine in your own senses in the case of blind tasting, or pairing food. You know, for all that people talk about pairing wine and food, I think it's something that can still feel very intimidating for the average person coming in to buy wine. Sure. And creating those experiences. We all love cookbooks. Kevin was talking about his love of cookbooks. And that was one of the first things we added as a group, was cookbooks.
And all the food and stuff.
Yeah, and so we're able to say, oh, you know, here's this wine, we love this, here's this cookbook that we would make with this, and here's this ingredient that we sourced for you.
When people come in and ask, you know, can you help me pick out a bottle of wine? My first question is usually, is it going to be served with food? And that 100% will guide where I'm going. If they say yes, tell me what they're eating. And then it becomes really easy to get them the right wine.
Yeah. We also, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the shop has always at least tried to have a little bit of everything. You know, whether it was very expensive Burgundy or all the German wine that exists in Germany, or just a everyday bottle. And I think that the trend that we're seeing in the market at large is that people, perhaps because they have access to the internet, or any number of reasons, people are looking for more different kinds of stuff. And so, of course, we're going to continue to try to have wine from weird regions that we have to point out on a map. And we have a non-alcoholic section, and it's going to keep getting bigger and more diverse, and non-alcoholic products are going to continue to get more interesting and more diverse. And if you're in the wine industry, the beverage selling industry, of course, it's going to be with us going forward. So there's no reason, it wouldn't make any sense to just say, oh no, we don't interact with that side of things. Plus some of it's really, really good.
Yeah.
So
I suppose over the next few years, we would continue to focus on increasing the experiential side and kind of just inviting people to learn more, to be open, continuing to learn more and be open ourselves, as we said, always learning.
Yeah.
And I suppose we would hope that we continue to be known more by our neighbors. You know, Portland is growing as a city. We happen to be in a neighborhood with a lot of new places to live. We want people to move here and see us as their neighbors, trust us to come in and buy their wine, not be afraid to come into the wine shop. And we added some really beautiful window painting last year from local hand window painter, Thank You Lettering Co., to try to, be bright, be bold, let people know we're here and we're friendly, and we want them to come ask questions. I think people think there are a lot of stupid questions in wine, and in reality there are no stupid questions in wine. There are only opportunities for us to get excited about sharing. And so we'll continue to try to bring that message to people.
Anything else on the horizon for the three of you, personally or professionally, that you're excited about? Anything else coming in the near future?
it's so hard, owning a business like this. It's so hard to look up from the grindstone that's right here, and try and look up at the horizon. We're always doing our best to try and think ahead, but yeah, it can be hard.
Yeah, I think everything I'm excited about we've touched on already.
Yeah.
New types of events are always fun. I think
Yeah.
we're all particularly excited to see how people react to doing more blind tasting events.
Yeah.
Because although that can be really intimidating, I think if you trust the process, it also can be really fun.
It's really fun.
And if you take that pretension out, it can be really fun and help people discover so much. So that's what I'm excited about right now.
We did a couple last month, and they were really well received. It was really fun. The energy was great.
Yeah.
So
More of that.
Yeah, yeah.
I once called a white Chateauneuf de Pape an Amarone.
That was a black glass.
That was black glass. Yeah, right.
Just to prove that
Yeah.
even seasoned wine professionals can make mistakes.
Yeah, for sure. But that's
An extremely
That's part
white
of
wine
it.
and an extremely red wine.
that's part of the fun.
Yeah. It's funnier for wine nerds.
Yeah.
Oregon wine industry. All of you talked earlier about your initial impressions of Oregon's wine industry. Tell me about evolution you've seen in Oregon, where the industry is now, and maybe a little bit about where the industry might be going.
I have an anecdote that I've been meaning to get to.
Okay, what's your anecdote?
Once upon a time, all the way back when I was working at Made in Oregon, an importer came by, and he worked for somebody in Ohio, I think, and he said to me, Oregon winemakers should pull out all their Pinot Noir vines and just replant with Gamay, because the Gamay is better. And I told him, Oregon winemakers are in the business of making money, so that's probably not going to happen. But the joke actually turned out to be on me because the Gamay coming out of the Willamette Valley is spectacular these days. Every time someone comes in with something else, it's absolutely amazing. And I'm not saying that it will replace Pinot Noir, but I think that the Willamette Valley will be known for more than Pinot Noir. That's the take-home message.
Unfortunately, with global warming doing what it's doing, it's giving. I mean, there's more opportunity to vary the grapes that you have in your vineyard. Which is exciting in a way, but it's also kind of sad and terrifying. But yeah, there's much more experimentation. People making all kinds of crazy things.
Yeah, I think we're going to continue to see diversification, both because people have to for climate change reasons and also because they want to. And I think we have seen so far what beautiful wines this region can make from the grapes that are already established. And I think we're in for a really interesting period of making those discoveries again. I think there are people who've planted Syrah. There's some really interesting Willamette Valley Syrah coming out.
There's Willamette Valley Fair Cervidou.
There is. I have a winemaker who makes Charleroi, other than Teutonic. They already make it.
Of course they do.
Of course they do. But I think we're in for an era of change. I think everybody in the wine industry globally is feeling change, and a lot of that change feels quite negative right now. But within our local industry, I think long term we are in for a lot of really interesting and positive change that will only broaden the global perception of what the Willamette Valley and the rest of the Oregon regions can do.
Okay, last question for you. You all have visible tattoos. We need to have a tattoo talk. So, tell us about your art.
My art is a copy of Rae's. So this is plants native to the Sierras, where she would go hiking with her father, and she was actually working on this tattoo with an artist named Courtney Roth when we started dating, and I sort of got to see it spread across her arm, and it was shockingly beautiful. And I am the first person in my entire family to get a tattoo, and I'd always sort of thought, like, if I'm going to get one, I'm going to get it right the first time. So I saw that, and I'm like, there it is, bingo. So I have these are plants native to the coast of Maine, where I grew up. The Rugosa rose, blueberry, and sweet fern here. And soon there will be a lupin stalk going up the top. And when we were on our honeymoon, actually, we walked into a small wine shop and on the Mediterranean coast in a town called Set, and it wasn't initially on our itinerary to go here. There's a variety of reasons we were there, but it was a magical time. We walked in, and the person in this shop looked at Rae's arm and said, "That's a Courtney Roth." So that was that. I mean, if I had any misgivings at all about getting a tattoo of my own, that sealed it. I was like, well, I want one of those. So
mine is mostly explained, which is great. Very well done.
Yeah.
And there's a part you can't see right now, which continues into a topographic map of the place where I spent most of my childhood with my dad, who was a retired park ranger who had to get a real job when he had kids, but spent many, many years traipsing through the mountains of California and took me there from a young age. So that was the what I wanted to have. And fortunately, this artist, who sadly has departed our dear Portland for the wilds of southern Vermont. But if you're ever in Vermont, shouts out, Courtney Rowe.
Well, mine are not nearly that cool, nor as good of a story.
They're cooler.
Well, this one I got when I was 14.
See?
With a little prison style tattoo gun. It was a pen casing and a Walkman battery and a guitar string and a needle. And the only guy drunker than me was the guy who gave me the tattoo. It's a little Mr. Yuck with a mohawk, and used to say AYM, which was the Apathetic Youth Militia, which was my little crew that we hung around with. But as I sobered up, I realized that it was a tattoo, and I spent a couple hours trying to scratch it out, and I managed to get a lot of it out. Particularly the Y and the M, which is really good, because I also learned later on that AYM is a registered acronym for the Aryan Youth Movement.
Oh, no.
And being a Jew, that would not fly so well. So that's that one. Then this one, my friend Ben Benson bought a tattoo gun, I think in the back of a magazine or something. He was a great artist, and he decided he wanted to do tattoos, and he's still a professional tattoo artist. But this, I think I was 17, and he got the tattoo gun. He's like, all right, let's do some tattoos. And my friend Jason got the first one, and then I was second, and he said, now I'm a professional tattoo artist, so you're gonna have to pay. So this one cost me $1. And it's just the logo, the little mascot for a band that I was into, RKL. This was the mid to late 80s. And then this one, he just drew on my arm. This one was the 10th tattoo he gave, and it cost $20. And he just drew it straight on my arm and then colored it in. And that's it.
I think that actually the three of those actually pretty well sum up the place, I feel like. Between the three, I feel like that's kind of Liner Elsen vibes right there. So all the questions that I have for the three of you, anything I didn't ask that I should have, anything we didn't talk about today that you wanted to talk about?
Gosh.
I don't think so. You did a very good job of covering just about everything.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. This was amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate you all sharing your individual and collective stories with us and sharing the space with us, and we'll let you off the hook.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
coming.